Harrington here, folks, back for more punishment. Now, as many of you know, we are fast approaching the deadline to renew your Florida companies. And as my firm does every year, we sent out a mass email to remind everyone. Now, this year we're making a change. It's a very small change regarding the registered agent. But in response to that mass email, I've gotten some very valid questions. So let's do it. Today, let's talk about registered agents. All right, so first of all, what is a registered agent? All right, as far as I know, within every U.S. state, you're required at the time of organizing or registering to do business within that state, you have to name a registered agent and provide a physical address. So that would be your registered office address. P.O. boxes won't do. So remember, even though for legal purposes, a business entity is often considered a person, yet when it comes to delivering an envelope, it's useful to have a human being that has an actual hand to receive that envelope. Now, what might be in such an envelope? Well, generally it's a complaint, service of process, but it could also be official documents from governmental entities. I will mention that different states have different requirements for service of process. California, for example, is less stringent than Florida, but all states require that there be some designated party who will receive the service of process or other official documents. That is your registered agent. All right, now who can be a registered agent? Well, the registered agent can be either an individual or another company. You can go online and you'll find lots of companies that provide registered agent services. Usually such companies will also provide a business address. That way you don't have to use your own name or your home address for the registered agent and the registered office. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. Now, if you're the owner of your own company, you can act as your own registered agent. And if the company has a physical office, well, then you'll provide the company's address as the registered office address. If you work out of a home office, that's okay too. You can use your home address as your registered office address. There's nothing wrong with that, at least from a compliance point of view. Now, we'll talk about some advantages and disadvantages, but it is legal to do that. In other words, you're not required to pay a professional registered agent, with one exception. If you don't live within the state, if you don't have an address, a physical address that you can use, then you're going to have to do something. Maybe you can borrow the address of a friend or something like that, but the most fundamental requirement for a registered agent is that you have a physical office within that state. So, for example, if you're a snowbird or you spend considerable amount of time out of state, well, then that's not going to work. In that situation, you would need to hire a professional registered agent. Now, the good news is that professional registered agents are generally cheap and easy to hire. By the time we go through the advantages, which we will do in just a moment, I think you'll agree there's really no good reason not to just hire a professional registered agent. But first, let's dig into the requirements of being a professional agent just a bit more in depth. Right, so registered agent requirements. Okay, there actually are some small differences depending upon the type of business that you have. For example, insurance companies are required to name their chief financial officer to receive service of process. Banks, savings associations, trust companies, they have some special rules as well. But for most of us, there are very minor differences between a corporation and an LLC and a partnership. For most of us, though, the requirements are just focused on the requirements in Florida, which are very similar in all the states of which I'm aware. Number one, you got to have that physical location in Florida. So again, no P.O. box, no forwarding addresses, etc. It has to be an actual building with real humans inside. Maybe that's one thing AI won't be able to take over anytime soon, unless I'm wrong. Two, you have to be available during business hours. So we're talking essentially 9 to 5. That means that if you do use your home address, well, then you're going to have to work from your home during those hours. And lastly, there's a consent requirement. The registered agent has to agree to receive the service of process, since after all, that is the entire purpose of a registered agent. So, if you're your own registered agent and you get a knock at the door and it looks to you like a process server, well, don't think about sneaking out the window or anything like that. There will be consequences if you try that. Okay, just very quickly, sole proprietors and partnerships. These are two types of entities that don't have to be registered with the state at all. So, as you might expect, there's no registered agent requirement. Now, I wouldn't get too excited about that because, remember, these types of business entities do not provide any liability protection. And that's why nobody really uses these forms in this country, at least. Let me give you an example just to drive home the point. Let's say that your kid sets up a lemonade stand in front of your house. Well, your kid is a sole proprietor. So make sure that nobody gets poisoned because as a sole proprietor, the kid doesn't get any corporate shield. And of course, kids are not legally responsible. So that means the customer is going to come after you personally. Now, I should point out that in Europe, or at least in Spain, I couldn't say all the European countries, but Spain for sure, registering a country is quite a bit more of an ordeal than it is here in the United States. So that's why it's common for individuals in Spain. I'll just speak to Spain because that's where we have a satellite office. It's very common for individuals to work as autónomos, which is roughly the equivalent of a sole proprietor. Now there it makes a little more sense because it is quite a hassle to set up a company in Spain. By contrast, here in the United States, there's really no reason to do that. Company formation is cheap and easy. Registered agents are cheap and readily available. I mean, what are we doing here? Are you going to really expose yourself to a potential disaster over a couple $100? All right, now that things are getting dark, let's talk about penalties. So, if you don't comply with the registered agent requirement, what can happen? All right, well, for one thing, you can't use the courts. Now, this is a very technical argument that doesn't usually come out, but I have used them myself. Generally, you look for these kinds of technical BS arguments when your client is on the wrong side of the law. I'll be perfectly honest. But whatever the case may be, just know that it's not a theoretical possibility. Clever or perhaps desperate attorneys will bring up these types of procedural defects to derail a case. I'm not going to say I'm proud of it, but I've done it and I will do it again. So if you bring me a crappy case and that's all I've got, this argument is coming out of the bag. Penalty number 2, fines, a classic. All right, for corporations, there's a $5 per day fine or $500, whichever is less, for non-compliance with a registered agent requirement. In fact, the Department of Legal Affairs can file a lawsuit to collect the fines and force you to appoint a registered agent. Penalty number 3, loss of good standing. You may on occasion have to request and produce a certificate of good standing to, say, a bank or governmental authority. Lenders may ask for that. And if the state discovers that you do not have a registered agent or that your registered agent is not in compliance with the requirements, well, then your company could be deemed to not be in good standing. And then that would be a bad thing in that situation. Now, besides the certificate of good standing, which you may or may not ever need, there's a bigger potential implication to losing your good standing. I mean, it goes back to the corporate shield, right? So, in other words, if your company is not in good standing, can creditors and litigants then go against you personally instead of just suing the company? In other words, you have defeated, one of the main purposes of having a company at all. If I were plaintiff's counsel and I discovered this defect, I would certainly try to get to you personally. Another potential penalty along the same lines is administrative dissolution. So, in the same way that you're not in good standing, if that condition continues for very long, the state could just shut down the company altogether. And as a few of us have experienced, to then reinstate that company thereafter, there's a hefty fine for that. I think it's about $600. Along the same lines as loss of good standing, administrative dissolution. So if you're not in good standing for some length of time, then the state could just shut down your company altogether. For one thing, there's a hefty reinstatement fee to fix that situation, which you would definitely want to do because you don't want to lose your corporate shield, right? And then the last penalty that I'll talk about seems like an obvious one, but let me flesh it out a bit. It's just non-receipt of legal notices. So again, if you don't have a good registered agent, then you may not get important notifications from governmental authorities. That would be bad, but let me take a step further and talk about lawsuits. So, let's face it, the primary purpose of a registered agent is receiving service of process. That's a statutory requirement. So what happens if the process server tries to serve the registered agent and figures out that some requirement is not met? Let me say that a little differently. The process server is going to try to serve the registered agent who is listed on the State Department's website. Well, if nobody's home, or it's a post office address, or whatever other defect, then this is going to come to light. Now, there are a number of alternative ways that the process server can get the complaint properly served, but I'm not too concerned about that because in that scenario, you will at least know about the lawsuit. The bigger concern is this. What if the plaintiff makes a motion to serve you by publication and cites your company's non-compliance as a legal basis for doing so? Well, it's certainly possible that a judge would go along with that motion. And what flows from that then? Well, in that case, the plaintiff can simply run an ad in a newspaper that nobody ever checks. So you're not going to see the ad. And after a 2-week period, then you will be deemed, or your company will be deemed, properly served, and the case can continue. What happens then? Well, you don't know about the case, so you're going to default. And that means, very shortly thereafter, the plaintiff will obtain a default final judgment. And there you go. Now you're stuck with this judgment. You've lost the case without even knowing about it. That would suck because now you have a judgment against your company, and it doesn't seem to me like it would be easy to set aside that judgment. Some default judgments are not particularly difficult to vacate or set aside. You could maybe explain your situation to the judge and get another try at it. I mean, after all, the Constitution prefers that cases be decided on their merit. That's a matter of due process. However, what would your argument be in this case? Is it excusable neglect on your part that you failed to comply with a state statute? That's not a great argument. And if I'm your attorney, I hate to be the one that has to make that argument. All right, so now you know most of the nuances regarding registered agents. It's not rocket science, frankly, but there are some nuances to it, and hopefully this was interesting to you. I found it interesting to do the research. But let me answer the actual question that's been posed, which has to do with the Space Connect. For those of you who've not been over to the Flagler building where we have our office in West Palm Beach, the Space Connect is a work lounge. That's what they call themselves. It's upstairs on the second floor. My law firm has the first floor, and then the Space Connect has the second floor. If you haven't seen the upstairs, you should probably check it out. Go to the website or social media. It's pretty cool. You'll see that it does have this lounge-like vibe to it. It's a co-working space, but it's set up on purpose to be a comfortable, cool place to hang out so that members will get to know each other and network. I'll provide a link to the website here below if you want to check it out. But before I start sounding like a commercial for the Space Connect, let me just say this. Along with being a co-working space, the Space Connect also offers what I've heard described as virtual office services. Maybe that term's a bit old-fashioned, but that's what I've heard it called. So that means the Space Connect provides services like a business address or receptionist services or mail handling services, things along those lines. In case you don't want or you don't need a physical office, it's designed to be a cost-effective solution. All right, now one of the services that the Space Connect provides is registered agent services. Now, we've been through the requirements of a registered agent, and you may have noticed that you don't have to be a lawyer to be a registered agent. So this is one of the services that the Space Connect provides. They are not a law firm. Having gone through the requirements, you now know that a registered agent doesn't have to be a lawyer, and the Space Connect indeed is not a law firm. So one of the good things about that is they can provide the service at a more cost-effective rate than can a law firm. And that's what we are going to do here. So we're going to allow Space Connect to be named as the registered agent, whereas we've used one of our sister companies here, 24. So now you'll see as your registered agent, the Space Connect. Now, what does that actually mean? First, let me hasten to add that while on the State Department's registration page, your registered agent will appear as the Space Connect, my law firm will, however, continue to supervise the actual filing of your annual reports. And we will, of course, be the ones who create your company if you hire us for that purpose. So what then does the Space Connect do? Well, they just hang out. They have an office that's open during regular business hours. Their name will appear on your registration page as the registered agent. And if the time comes that you're to receive official documents or a lawsuit, then a Space Connect personnel will receive it and then bring it to my attention and yours. That's really all I have for you guys today. If you do have comments, please, by all means, send them my way. I welcome your thoughts. Recuerda que por supuesto hablamos español, and I will talk to you again soon.